Reflections. Why the Mind Matters in Christianity, Part 1. Excerpts from Love Your God with All Your Mind, The Role of Reason in the Life of the Soul by J.P. Morland. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to recognize that our entire culture is in trouble. We are staring down the barrel of a loaded gun, and we can no longer afford to act like it's loaded with blanks. Our society has replaced heroes with celebrities, the quest for a well-informed character, with the search for flat abs, substance and depth, with image and personality. In the political process, the makeup man is more important than the speechwriter, and we approach the voting booth, not on the basis of a well-developed philosophy of what the state should be, but with a heart full of images, emotions, and slogans, all packed into 30-second sound bites. The mind-numbing, irrational tripe that fills TV talk shows is digested by millions of bored, lonely Americans hungry for that sort of stuff. What is going on here? What has happened to us? There are no simple answers to these questions, and I don't pretend to offer a full analysis as a solution to this quandary. But I do think the place to start looking for an answer is to remind ourselves of something Jesus Christ said long ago. In his inaugural address, he spelled out how his community of followers were to understand themselves. With characteristic insight, he asserted that you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? Matthew 5:13. One job of the church is to be salty to the world in which it finds itself. So if that world grows saltless, we should look first to the church herself to glean what we can about her contribution to the situation. In the rest of this video, I will demonstrate that a major cause of our current cultural crisis consists of a worldview shift from a Judeo-Christian understanding of reality to a post-Christian one. Moreover, this shift itself expresses a growing anti-intellectualism in the church, resulting in the marginalization of Christianity in society, its lack of saltiness, if you will, and the emergence of the most secular culture the world has ever seen. That secular culture is now simply playing out the implications of ideas that have come to be widely accepted in a social context, in which the church is no longer a major participant in the war of ideas. The role of intellectual development is primary in evangelical Christianity, but you might not know that from a cursory look at the church today. In spite of this, if we are to have Christ formed in us, Galatians 4:19, we must realize the work of God in our minds and pay attention to what a Christ-like mind might look like. As our Savior has said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. Matthew 22:37. To do this, we cannot neglect the soulful development of a Christian mind. Beginning in the 1800s, the 19th century saw an increase in criticism, launching the avalanche of anti-religious discourse that has plagued America ever since. The philosophies of Hume and Kant influenced culture, and confidence in arguments for the existence of God and the rationality of Christian faith was shaken. As a result, fewer and fewer people regarded the Bible as a body of divinely revealed, true propositions about various topics that requires a devoted intellect to grasp and study systematically. Instead, the Bible was widely sought as a practical reference for ethical guidance and spiritual development. In describing the influence of anti-intellectualism on modern evangelicalism, the author focuses on 5 traits. This video will examine 3 of the 5 traits listed, with an emphasis on how secularism, when viewed in moderation, affects the intellectual life of Christians. Pay close attention and consider how these might have affected your own thoughts. A misunderstanding of faith's relationship to reason has permeated our culture for centuries. First, while few would actually put it in these terms, faith is now understood as a blind act of will, a decision to believe something that is either independent of reason or that is a simple choice to believe, while ignoring the paltry lack of evidence for what is believed. By contrast with this modern misunderstanding, biblically, faith is a power or skill to act in accordance with the nature of the kingdom of God, a trust in what we have reason to believe is true. Understood in this way, we see that faith is built on reason. We should have good reasons for thinking that Christianity is true before we dedicate ourselves completely to it. We should have solid evidence that our understanding of a biblical passage is correct before we go on to apply it, and so on. If this is correct, then sermons should target people's thinking as much as their wills and feelings. Sunday school should be more effective in training believers how to think carefully about their faith. Training in apologetics should be a regular part of discipleship. Apologetics is a New Testament ministry of helping people overcome intellectual obstacles that block them from coming to or growing in the faith by giving reasons for why one should believe Christianity is true and by responding to objections raised against it. Local church after local church should be raising up and training a group of people who serve as apologists for the entire congregation. For many, religion is identified with subjective feelings, sincere motives, personal piety, and blind faith. As the song puts it, "You ask me how I know He lives within my heart." In other words, we test the truth of our religion not by a careful application of our God-given faculties of thought, or even by biblical mandates, see for example 2 Corinthians 10 verse 5, but rather by our private experiences. For the most part, theoretical reason is just not part of our local church life any longer. We often hear it said in church that we don't want a discussion to get too theological, we want to keep it practical, as though good practice did not require careful thought to direct it. We sing, "In my heart, Lord, be glorified," but when was the last time you heard someone sing, "In my intellectual life, Lord, be glorified"? Unfortunately, this misunderstanding of the relationship between faith and reason has led to an even more sinister trend among modern evangelicals. There is a clear separation of the secular and the sacred. There has emerged a secular-sacred separation in our understanding of the Christian life, with the result that Christian teaching and practice are privatized and placed in a separate compartment from the public or so-called secular activities of life. The withdrawal of the corporate body of Christ from the public sphere of ideas is mirrored by our understanding of what is required to produce an individual disciple. Religion has become personal, private, and too often simply a matter of how I feel about things. By contrast, the culture encourages me to invoke my intellect in my secular public life. By way of example, I'm always encouraged to use my intellect in how I approach my vocation, select a house, or learn to use a computer. But within the sphere of my private spiritual life of faith, it is my heart, and my heart alone, that operates. The life of the mind is thus separated, broken off, and compartmentalized as a function of the secular life instead of more naturally being integrated with the spiritual. As a result, Sunday school classes, discipleship materials, and sermons too often address the heart and not the head, or focus on personal growth and piety, and not on cultivating an intellectual love for God in my vocation. In order to prepare its members for the intellectual challenges they will face in the workplace, classroom, and community at large, the church must educate all people. As theologian Carl Henry put it, training the mind is an essential responsibility of the home, the church, and the school. Unless evangelicals prod young people to disciplined thinking, they waste, even undermine, one of Christianity's most precious resources. But if faith and reason are polar opposites, and if discipleship is private and sacred but college studies are public and secular, then training the intellect will not be valued as a part of mentoring anyone. That is why our discipleship materials often leave Christian young people vulnerable to atheistic college professors with an axe to grind. For such professors, shredding an intellectually unprepared undergraduate's faith is like shooting fish in a barrel. We have seen that the church was attacked intellectually in the latter half of the 19th century and was not adequately prepared to respond to this attack in kind. Instead, with notable exceptions, The church withdrew from the world of ideas and the intellectual life and was thereby marginalized. As former President of the United Nations General Assembly, Charles Malik has said, "I must be frank with you. The greatest danger confronting American evangelical Christianity is the danger of anti-intellectualism. The mind in its greatest and deepest reaches is not cared for enough." This withdrawal and marginalization of the church has had devastating consequences for our attempt to produce vibrant, confident disciples and to penetrate our culture with a Christian worldview and the gospel of Christ. These consequences are most evident in the following way. Anti-intellectualism has spawned an irrelevant gospel. Today we share the gospel primarily as a means of addressing felt needs. We give testimonies of changed lives and say to people that if they want to become better parents or overcome depression or loneliness, then Christ is the answer for them. As true as this may be, such an approach to evangelism is inadequate for two reasons. First, it does not reach people who may be out of touch with their feelings. Consequently, if men in our culture are, in general, less in touch with their feelings than women, this approach will not reach men effectively. Second, it invites the response, "Sorry, but I don't have a need." Have you ever wondered why no one responded to the Apostle Paul in this manner? If you look at his evangelistic approach in Acts 17:20, the answer becomes obvious. He based his preaching on the fact that the gospel is true and reasonable to believe. He reasoned with and tried to persuade people intelligently to accept Christ. Now, if the gospel is true and reasonable to believe, then it is obvious that every person has a need for Christ's forgiveness and power, whether or not that person feels that need. The only response to the Pauline evangelistic approach is either to accept Christ or deny the truth of the gospel. The person approached is not let off the hook simply because he is out of touch with his feelings or doesn't recognize the felt need. The fact that many respond to our evangelistic efforts by denying a need for Christ should tip us off to an important fact. If truth and reasonableness are not uppermost in our presentation of the gospel to a pagan culture already predisposed to regarding religion as a set of private feelings, then we'll consistently hear this response. Well, that's fine for you if having those feelings helps you. Religion is now viewed by many as a placebo or emotional crutch precisely because that is how we often pitch the gospel to unbelievers. I wish I could stop here. But again, there's another trend in evangelicalism that we must place at the feet of anti-intellectualism. Modern American culture is largely secular in this sense. Most people have little or no understanding of a Christian way of seeing the world, nor is a Christian worldview an important participant in the way we as a society frame and debate issues in the public square. Three of the major centers of influence in our culture, the university, the media, and the government, are largely devoid of serious religious discussion. In fact, it is not unfair to say that university, media, and governmental leaders are often illiterate about how Christians see the world and why. This is evident, for example, in those rare cases when the major television news media try to feature a Christian perspective on abortion, the state, or anything else. Usually Christians watching the program feel misrepresented and misunderstood. More often than not, however, Christian perspectives are simply ignored and not covered at all. If a Martian were watching television before coming to Earth, he would get the idea that Americans are irreligious. Secularists tolerate religion as long as it remains a privatized perspective relative to a subgroup in society, and as long as Christians don't assert that their views are objectively true and defend them articulately. R.C. Sproul, John Gerstner, and Arthur Lindsley have accurately captured this secular attitude toward Christianity. The church is safe from vicious persecution at the hands of the secularist, as educated people have finished with stake-burning circuses and torture racks. No martyr's blood is shed in the secular West. So long as the church knows her place and remains quietly at peace on her modern reservation. Let the babes pray and sing and read their Bibles, continuing steadfastly in their intellectual retardation. The church's extinction will not come by sword or pillory, but by the quiet death of irrelevance. But let the church step off the reservation. Let her penetrate once more the culture of the day, and the face of secularism will change from a benign smile to a savage snarl. The primary characteristic of modern secularism is its view of the nature and limits of knowledge. It is critical to understand this, because if knowledge gives one power, we give surgeons and not carpenters the right to cut us open, precisely because surgeons have the relevant knowledge not possessed by carpenters. Then those with the cultural say-so about who does and doesn't have knowledge will be in a position to marginalize and silence groups judged to have mere belief and private opinion.
On the one hand, the emergence of a new upgraded elite of superhumans enhanced by bioengineering and brain-computer interfaces and things like that. And on the other hand, a new, massive, useless class. A class that has no military or economic usefulness and therefore also no political power.
For many secularists, knowledge is obtained solely by means of the senses and science. Something is true and reasonable to believe to the degree that it can be tested by the five senses. It can be seen, heard, touched, tasted, or felt. Seeing is believing. Likewise, knowledge is identical to scientific knowledge. If you can prove something scientifically, then it is culturally permissible or even obligatory to believe it. Science is the measure of all things, and when a scientist speaks about something, he or she speaks ex cathedra.
Scientism, very basically, is the belief that scientific inquiry and discovery will answer all of the existential questions in human life. All those questions which religion seeks to satisfy, scientism holds up material discovery as the means of salvation, the means of transcendence. Transhumanism is an outgrowth of that. Transhumanism is the idea that technology will be the instrument of that salvation, the instrument of that transcendence. So this is not uncommon knowledge, I think, in our era. It's in fact very obvious, especially in the wake of the pandemic.
You know what our biggest enemy is in America? Our fellow Americans.
Frankly, we know that we can't trust the unvaccinated.
Now is the time to do what you're told.
This is not
Trust the science.
Trust the science.
The superheroes, the scientists.
I'm tired of hearing that.
Trust the science! Trust the science!
Today, fewer Americans say they trust science.
There is a degree of anti-science feeling in this country. And I think it is not just related to science, it's almost related to authority and a mistrust in authority that spills over because in some respects, scientists, because they're trying to present data, may be looked upon as being authoritative.
I trust the scientists.
freedom or personal choice.
No, screw your freedom.
People who are incubators for every variant to come, walking around lawfully unvaccinated? That's psychotic.
If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war.
We've been patient, but our patience is wearing thin. And your refusal has cost all of us.
And, you know, even when I'm at home alone, I wear not one, but 2 masks because I trust it that much. I bet you don't have that much faith in science. And I got 6 vaccines. I'm getting my 7th tomorrow. You jealous? I bet you bigots haven't even got your 5th vaccine.
I believe, for the most part, you can trust respected medical authorities. You know, I believe I'm one of them, so I think you can trust me. So I think you can.
You're a schmuck.
This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
Their freedom.
You are incredibly rational and believe in science. We are now in an age where there is intense mistrust of science. How does one battle that?
Well, we have to make the truth more interesting than the oversimplistic conspiracy.
How do you do that?
There may be some need to slow down the crazy stuff. stuff. So there is a need for innovation to think about how you draw these lines, and particularly when you're getting out, exposing to strangers something that might draw them into a series of falsehoods.
Well, when you're dealing with science, one person's word is not as good as another. The science determines what is the correct answer to a particular question.
Why is it that more and more people seem to refuse to simply trust the science? After all, scientific research and discovery has been the hallmark of solving problems and overcoming challenges for centuries now.
Listen to the science has become the rallying cry of the most irrational, anecdote-driven, fact-free believers in voodoo I have encountered in my lifetime.
It was the vaunted World Health Organization that blindly repeated talking points from the Communist Chinese government suggesting that COVID wasn't transmitted from person to person.
Trust the science.
Trust the science.
The superheroes, the scientists.
I'm tired of hearing that.
Trust the science! Trust the science!
Today, fewer Americans say they trust science.
They don't trust science because science is increasingly untrustworthy.
Trust the science! Trust the science!
For example, if theological arguments imply homosexuality is in some sense a choice over which one is responsible, and science makes a claim to the contrary, which one will win in public debate? We often hear it said that if your religious beliefs work for you, that's great, but don't impose them on others. However, no one would say that a scientist is imposing anything on anyone when he says that water is H2O or that 2 + 2 = 4. Nor would these claims be viewed as private opinions whose sole value was their usefulness for those who believe them. Why? Because only science supposedly deals with facts, truth, and reason, but religion and ethics allegedly deal with private, subjective opinions. I have no bone to pick with legitimate science. Indeed, it has been argued repeatedly that science was born in Christian Europe precisely because Christian theology helped provide worldview justification for its assumptions. What I do reject is the idea that science and science alone can claim to give us knowledge. This assertion, known as scientism, is patently false, and in fact, not even a claim of science, but rather a philosophical view about science. Nevertheless, once this view of knowledge was widely embraced in the culture, the immediate effect was to marginalize and privatize religion by relegating it to the back of the intellectual bus. To verify this, one need only compare the number of times scientists, as opposed to pastors or theologians, are called upon as experts on the evening news. If knowledge and reason are identical with what can be tested scientifically, or with scientific theories that a majority of scientists believes to be correct, then religion and ethics will no longer be viewed as true, rational domains of discourse because supposedly religious or ethical claims are not scientifically testable. This line of thought has led to several trends in society whose combined influence is to hinder ideal human flourishing as God intended it to be. It is similar to the sort of cultural milieu that spawned Stalinism in the Soviet Union and Nazism in pre-World War II Germany, with all of their attendant evils and tragic loss of human life and dignity. As G.K. Chesterton bemoaned, once people stop believing in God, the problem is not that they will believe nothing. Rather, the problem is that they will believe anything. This is just what we are seeing happen in our secular culture, bereft of the presence of an engaged, articulate evangelical community.